Okay, before pressing on the new stuff, any stuff about the previous stuff, or stuff to be, that needs more stuff?
Is exam 5, is that the final? Is it similar level?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, it's up there available on Blackboard now.
Oh, it is on Blackboard, okay.
Yep, but it covers everything, so it's a comprehensive final. But you can do it, anytime you want, but just pretty sure it's completed by then.
Is it worth more than the other exams, or?
Nope, it's worth the same.
Okay.
Main reason it's included is because I guess it's good to have a final, but also to sort of provide like an extra exam to, if a previous one doesn't go that well, you can use that as sort of a redemption for it.
So is the paper the thing that's the most heaviest graded?
Papers are 30%. The paper itself, well, for an individual thing, yes. The paper is 30%. The test in total are 40%. So each test individually is 10% because it goes four test count, and the quizzes are 30% in total. But the exams are the largest category. But in terms of like being worth the most for one thing, the paper is worth the most there.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, so last time we're looking at equality, specifically equality in race and ethnicity, and we're looking at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as our reading for this discussion. And we saw questions about what are the problems that were faced then in 1863, Emancipation Proclamation, and then when Dr. King gave his speech in 1963, and then we jumped ahead to 2015. Now, there's also a couple questions remaining, namely, three questions remaining, or three things remaining. Specifically, the basis of the claim, and then next, the notion of the time, and then lastly, the matter of how to bring it about. Now, in terms of the basis for the claim, what Dr. King is doing, or seems to be doing, is what I sort of recast as the argument from consistent application. The idea is if there's a set of principles, if they're not applied consistently, that's morally problematic. So what does Dr. King refer to when he makes his argument as to why the problems of lack of freedom, segregation, discrimination, and poverty should be addressed? What does he base that on? Why does the United States have a moral obligation to address those problems? Yeah, and where is the guarantee for equality and all that other stuff given?
So how is it given?
Oh, where is it given? Where is it written down?
In the Constitution.
Yeah, he refers to the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. And sort of essentially his argument is, this is written down. It's on paper, it's part of the rules. The idea of all men are created equal, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, plus all the constitutional rights. So his argument is a very reasonable one. This is all laid out written down on paper, and there's a moral obligation to consistently apply those. So it's a very solid moral foundation. Now, the last two questions are the questions of when and how. Now, when it comes to when, and bringing about social change, and discussing contexts where people are being oppressed or mistreated, this question always arises. If you're going to bring about change, how fast should it be brought about? And essentially there are two main camps. What gets its own name, gradualism, and the other would be essentially as soon as possible. Well, let's call it ASAP, or right away. Now, throughout history, if you look at cases of there being just problems in general, or specifically in cases of oppression or mistreatment, then the question comes up: how fast should you do this? Now, we can also use an analogy. You can think of it sort of like, well, you can use two. One is the classic pulling off a Band-Aid. Some people are of the view that you take off the Band-Aid how?
Fast.
Yeah, hurts less. Other people are of the view that you do slow and hope that doesn't take the hair with it. Same with like the going to the pool. There are two main strategies. The people who do the slow, just gradually go in, and the other people just cannonball right in the water. And so it's similar here. Do we go with like gradualism, like slowly pulling off the Band-Aid, or slowly getting in the water, or to do it as soon as possible. You know, band it off, or jump in. Now, when it comes to social change, in the course of this context, we're looking at social change relating to civil rights. Is it an argument for bringing about social change, a good argument for bringing it about gradually, by doing it sort of slowly? Yes. What would be a reason for that?
Get people used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just get people used to it.
Yeah, like with the pool analogy. Some people like the view you just don't jump in when it's freezing, that could kill you. Not really, but the idea is that people will get used to it. They may be resistant if someone just started to make change just like immediately. And it may take people, if you try to do it right away, they might be, but going into it gradually, they might accept it. And you could use another analogy to like exercise. If someone wants to, start running, you don't want them like, okay, I've run before, I'm gonna go out and do 20 miles, because that would probably finish them off. Yeah, so the idea of getting people used to it, accustomed to it. And other reasons to go gradually.
It's probably easier.
Yeah, it can be easier. Slow change is easier than fast change. And it might also be, again, going like the exercise analogy, it might be seen as being kind of necessary. That you may not be able to change things. If someone says, they get up one morning and say, I want to have a six-pack abs, that's not going to happen overnight. And so we may say, well, I want to have this injustice addressed. It may take a while. Now, but what's the downside or argument against gradualism?
Takes too long.
Yeah, it takes too long. And later may become never.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's never, people may say, well, later, wait for it, but it may never occur. And so it could be seen as like a stalling tactic. We'll bring about change, later. And of course, to use another analogy, which one is, is not original to me, it was used by others. If you're in a house and it's burning down, do you gradually leave the house? No, I mean, if it's an awful situation, you want to end that as quickly as possible. So there are good arguments. The arguments against gradualism are arguments for as soon as possible. Now, during the time period, Dr. King was working towards bringing about the civil rights, people did raise this idea of gradualism. His position, as a matter of fact, was against gradualism. And his view was the change should occur quickly. And I mean, another reason which ties into our next question about how is also the concern that people get tired of waiting, and they may decide to take matters into their own hands, and that may not go the way, may not go well. Yeah, which takes us to the method of how. Now, traditionally, when it's bringing about change, now two options. There is violence, and of course the other option is, in some degree, and nonviolence. And if we, go back to the 60s, violence was being seriously considered as an option. It's actually always being seriously considered as an option. And same with nonviolence. Now, on the side of violence, what are some advantages or good reasons to use violence to bring about social change?
I guess with fear. I don't know how can I say it. I mean, with violence, you do create fear, so you would think that it won't be gradual, things will change ASAP.
Yeah, violence can be quick. It gets things done.
Yeah, people get their point across with violence too.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a clear point. And probably the most compelling argument for violence is that historically it has worked. When the colonies were getting upset with Britain, I mean, they did try talking, but eventually they resorted to violence, and that seemed to have been a success. Similarly, like in France, they had the revolution there, went right to violence. And yeah, so we could say violence has an appeal that it does work. It can be quite effective. And it can be often very, very fast. What are the downsides to violence? What's probably the biggest downside?
You get hurt.
Yeah, people get hurt, people get killed. So it comes with a cost in lives and blood. Any other disadvantages to violence?
It doesn't necessarily tell the people what's going, like what your actual problem is. If you're just beating somebody up, they're like, okay, you beat me up, but truly what's your reason? You're not explaining to somebody. So I think before people try violence, they do talk, we try to talk things out, like you said, which is part of like, doing it gradually, but I mean, I think even before violence, people do try to find like a right way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, usually, as you say, people usually don't go right to violence,
Right.
at least most people. And they do try to, talk it through.
I don't know like the real downsides of I mean, the only downsides I know of violence will be, people getting hurt.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is the harm being done, people being killed. And of course, there's another thing is if you're trying to bring about, change within a society, the use of violence can, sort of mark things, for the future. Because if things are done with violence and, destruction and so forth, think of, I think like a civil war in the United States or civil wars in other countries. It takes much longer to recover from violence than it does from nonviolence. So on the side of nonviolence, the sort of pros are that people don't get hurt. Well, not everybody. I mean, not as much hurting, not as much bloodshed. And it's also, as you said, nonviolent means usually involve communicating with people, and it typically creates less, resentment, feuds and hard feelings. Now, which side did Dr. King come down on? Yeah, famously, nonviolence. And he famously used the method of civil disobedience, essentially, going in, breaking the existing laws, getting arrested, crowding the jails, and getting a lot of attention from the news media. And so it turned out, nonviolence in that case turned out to be an effective strategy. Also, sort of a practical matter, there are really only 2 times that it makes sense to use, when it's rational to use violence. One of those is when there are no other options, and the other one is when you think you've got a good chance of winning. And so another reason not to use violence, it would be, well, would it actually succeed? And if the answer is no, then nonviolence might be a better option. And sometimes it comes down to just a practical thing, which is more likely to work. And there's also, of course, the moral concern. And Dr. King's main argument for nonviolence was that if you're engaged in a moral struggle for something good and right, that it should not devolve into violence. So essentially a moral reason to use a moral method. Now his ultimate dream, of course, laid out in the speech, is his hope is that, to use a classic line, that someday people will be judged by the content of their characters and not the color of their skin, that there'll be no more racism. And of course it's a dream. Now a good question is there's a couple questions. One is, in regards to the dream, has some of the dreams come true even a little bit since 1963?
Yes.
What evidence do we have for that? That the nightmare is not, less of a nightmare. Well, what are some big changes since '63?
Our schools, like our integrated, like with the colleges, the regular schools, we get to work with each other. I think, like, lawfully things have changed, but as far as, like, not having your own perspective of how to treat others, from different backgrounds, that's still the same. So that's where it comes from. Like, half of it is kind of, like, the dream has come true a little bit, but not fully.
Yeah, it's kind of like maybe a half dream.
I mean, yeah, like, Obama is glad, but then you have people that are like, hey, and he's not
True,
you know,
people
he's
do.
mixed. No, it's just like, but you still have people who hate him even though he's like.
True. Yeah, I mean, there's still plenty
It's
of,
like a but every time.
yeah, there's always still a but.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is better than the '60s when there was nothing to
Yeah.
stick.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't in the '60s. It was just now it's like we have a black president, but. So I guess that's eventually it'll just be we have, and there'll be no but. So, yeah, we still clearly progressed quite a bit from 1963. And there's a lot of visible evidence. Changes in laws. It's no longer it's no longer socially acceptable for people to be openly racist, which they can just be racist on Twitter these days, on social media. Now, looking to the future, is it possible for that dream to be fulfilled? To someday have a situation where, literally race does not matter, that would become, colorblind, post-race society?
I mean,
I don't think so. I feel like back in the '60s, it's like all the blacks were on the same, social class. But now you got, blacks in better positions now. So not everybody thinks the same. So not everybody has the same war, I guess, in terms of, you might have somebody who comes from a low income class family who has a more uphill battle to go compared to somebody who's, so not everybody's in the same social class as they were in the '60s.
Any reason to think that someday the dream will come true? That will be, racism will be maybe not entirely eliminated, but effectively eliminated. That it will be.
it could be over time, but I think in order for racism to not exist, you just have to not talk about it. And the reason why I say that because like now, like kids are like now in elementary and middle school, and now they're making their books where they don't even discuss like slavery anymore, or they kind of interpret slavery to not be a bad thing. And some people are like for that and against it, but it's kind of like if you're against that, then how do you get rid of racism? Like it's like which one do you want? Because I feel like when a kid is taught something or whatever, it's like they're gonna keep put it in just use it based off what they're going through. Like well they treated us like that back then, and it still probably exists later on in the future, or something that you probably would think like okay, I'm different from the other kids. Now I see why. So I think overall it's always gonna be there. Like it says that we should be all equal, but I just feel like, it would never, I'm not even just talking about what race is, even with women and men, it's never going to be that, that much of a balance.
I think it all starts with heritage, like she said, it all starts with heritage. Before I came to FAM, I was at Clemson University, and, all the stuff that happened in South Carolina, I never thought that would happen. I'm from Toronto, so, seeing stuff like that, how, it wasn't a small incident, but an incident over a flag can divide a state. So it all starts with heritage, because you think, people, I guess, born in the '90s wouldn't have that same mindset of, being so strong about such a flag, but I think it all starts with heritage.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. History matters, and it endures. That's a good example. You think, okay, that was, a fairly long time ago. No one's still alive from that time. And you think people would be ready to say, okay, we probably shouldn't have this, this Confederate flag flying. But as I said, people are still very committed to that. And so that heritage, good or bad heritage, will probably stick for a long, long time. I mean, and if we look at other historical, isms where people dislike each other, clashes, we see that those can endure for thousands of years. So that is a fair point. Maybe it'd be something that's, once it's happened and it's in the history, it may never be able to be, when people remember it, it'll still be part of the, and some people suggest, we should just not talk about it. But then the problem is if we don't talk about it, then we're kind of ignoring, the reality of history. Yeah, there's that challenge, because if we keep remembering it, then we keep remembering it, but if we don't talk about it, then that's, that's deceit. We're
Yeah,
forgetting.
it's even a problem when you don't really, like, when, you know, we don't even acknowledge, like, where we from, as far as, like, you know, our roots are, you know, oh, you know, what, you know, tribe or what, you know, part of Africa we come from, and all that other kind of stuff, huh? Yeah, either don't know or not
Yeah.
trying to know, or, you know, it's just all that, it's a lot.
I think when you don't talk about it, you have a perfect example of what happened in South Carolina.
Mhm.
Like one incident could, you know, change everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you don't talk about stuff, you know, you assume that everybody's moved on.
Mhm.
But when you have one incident, not even anywhere,
Mhm.
I feel like it really changed things. So it's best to talk about stuff.
Yeah, this is something that could just endure, you know, it seems, you know, considerably less than obviously in the 60s and so forth, but it may be something that endures for a long time. Now, kind of a science fiction thing, but one thing that may change it would be if we found other life, and then we'd be racist against aliens.
I honestly think that racism can't go away, because I feel like a lot of people who are racist or having those racist thoughts from who taught them that, but those people are going to die off eventually. And I feel like now people are more open and are more accepting to a lot of different things. So if you can be accepting of certain things, it's like, why can't you be accepting of the person's color just because they're darker than you or lighter than you? I kind of see where the problem lies.
Yeah, I mean, time, as you point out, time may be something that cures it, because it's something that's, you know, passed on, and if there are less and less, you know, racist, it's less and less accepted, then eventually it can kind of, you know, fade away. And especially if you look at, like, the United States. The United States is becoming, it's going to cease to be majority, you know, white, and the reality would be people just have to, in a way they might be just have to force to accept it. You can't be, racism just won't be an option anymore. Yeah, so maybe the case that eventually the dream will come true, that we'll judge each other by things that matter, like our commitment to sports teams and taste in music. Yeah, there's always hope. Okay, now we move away from humans, us, to non-humans. Now, it may be thought that ethical concerns about animals are a relatively recent thing. You know, something that came up, you know, when people started, when you had movements like, you know, PETA, people for eating tasty animals. No, different. People for ethical treatment. There actually is. There is a people for eating tasty animals group, and they're like the anti-PETA. They cook and eat animals. But we often think of something like animal rights as something that sort of arose out of maybe the 60s and 70s, you know, kind of the hippie thing. But actually, interestingly, the concerns about, you know, the treatment of other animals and other species has been around for a long time. It goes back to the ancient Greeks, for example. It has been considered throughout history. Now, it has kind of entered the mainstream fairly recently. We do have, you know, in the news and so forth, we hear about groups that are devoted to, you know, saving rainforests, saving animals, trying to prevent extinction, and then people who are, you know, we've seen the sort of undercover videos where they go into like, yeah, they go to places where, you know, where they raise and, you know, kill, kill cattle and so forth, and, you know, videotape that, you know, the infamous, you know, one with the sick cow where they're dragging it up and slaughtering it. And so, and also with things like, you know, saving the pandas and saving the whales, it has become much more mainstream. But there are still, you know, some important moral issues there. Now, a big chunk of it, of course, is how we use animals. So what do we use animals for?
Food.
Yeah, food.
Food.
We eat a lot, we eat those tasty animals. But as one compelling argument said, if we weren't supposed to eat them, they wouldn't be made of meat. It's true. They're made out of like rock or something that we couldn't eat. So if they're made out of meat, you gotta eat. Yeah, we eat them, common thing. We used to, less so now because we have, you know, tractors and stuff, but they were a source of, you know, basically motor power. You know, even in some parts of the world they're still used. So people ride horses for transportation, They, hitch horses or oxen up to plows or to pull wagons. And so we still use them as basically, power sources. We conduct experiments on them, for animal testing. We use, in addition to food, we also use their parts. Like my belt is dead cow, I'm wearing dead cow on my feet. And we apparently Guinness, I didn't know this until recently, they filter Guinness through fish bladders. So it doesn't taste like fish or much, but they're changing the recipe apparently because to make it acceptable to vegans because a little bit of, if you ever had Guinness, you get a little bit of fish bladder in there. And of course we used to use other parts, the bones and so forth. But we still use a lot of parts of it. And we use it in shampoos, for example. If you look at some shampoos, they would use animal proteins. So you're just rubbing that dead animal into your hair. I mean, it's been processed. It's not like taking like a dead raccoon and just kind of rubbing that in. That wouldn't get you too clean. Not too good for the raccoon either. We also keep them as pets. Now, there have been some, I would say extremists who think that we shouldn't keep animals as pets because it, oppresses them. My own thought, of course, is to have a pet is that they get a pretty sweet deal if we treat them well. We shouldn't mistreat animals, but I think that, for the most part, dogs and cats get a pretty sweet ride. So, and if we just left them out in the wild, they'd be eaten by, dingoes or something. But so we use them in a variety of ways that raise various moral questions. Now, these do include a variety of things. Like one deals with the moral status of animals, because a way to look at it kind of morally is looking back at like Kant and John Stuart Mill, is do animals count at all? When we're doing our moral consideration, do they matter? And we saw with John Stuart Mill, the answer is yeah, because they experience pleasure and pain, so they matter in that calculation. Kant, as we'll see in a bit, even though his moral theory would seem to say that animals have no worth because they're not rational, he actually argues we should be kind to them. And that's one of the important debates, what status do animals actually have? Because if they're similar to us, then we would argue they shouldn't suffer that abuse. To give one concrete example, if you're still looking for a paper topic and you like whales and law, there was an attempt to bring a lawsuit against SeaWorld for enslaving killer whales and dolphins. They tried to argue that it was violating the constitutional rights of the whales. Now, some people thought that was just absurd. How can you consider that to be comparable to human slavery? But they did argue if dolphins and killer whales are actually people, then doing that to them would violate their constitution. Yeah. Now, that hinges on on their moral status. Are killer whales and dolphins, are they actually people? And we don't know. I mean, there are some scientists who seriously consider they are because they have big brains. They're social. They seem to use language. They seem to have names for each other. And I mean, they're very different from us. They don't speak English, etc. But there are some reasonable arguments that they could be as intelligent as we are. And so, if it's by analogy, if they're like us, then it would be just as wrong as kidnapping kids and making them work in the circus as it would be to kidnap whales. Others will make the argument, look, they're smart animals, but they're still just animals. They can be mistreated, of course, and we shouldn't mistreat them, but they're still just animals. So you can't, they don't have constitutional rights. Whales don't get that. So it often comes down to the questions of, what status do they have? What sort of protections should they have, even if they are, people like us? The issue of animal rights. Now, for the most part, most people, generally think that we probably shouldn't do horrible things to animals for no purpose whatsoever. Pretty well established. But then the question becomes, is it okay to eat them? Is it okay to keep them as pets, to have them entertain us, to use them for laboratory testing? So those questions still remain. Now, we'll look at 3 different types of views regarding the critters. Well, 4 actually, throw in a bonus one. The first one will be religious arguments, because interestingly enough, or boringly enough, when people want to justify eating animals, they often bring up religious arguments, interestingly enough. Secondly, we'll look at a scientific view put forth by René Descartes, French guy, really dead, but it actually provided the basis for, sort of horribly, the mistreatment of animals for a very long time. Then we'll look at a psychological view presented by our good dead friend Immanuel Kant, and lastly, utilitarianism. Now before heading to our first reading, anything about the stuff so far? Needs more stuff. First we're looking at is our good dead friend St. Thomas Aquinas, who we saw before. And all the background for him still remains, including his cool backstory about the flying cow story. Now, what Aquinas does in this case is one of his common methods of arguing is kind of reverse of what you've been doing in the paper. Instead of like arguing for your position, then considering an objection and reply to it, one thing that Aquinas did was kind of the reverse. He would bring up, like the statement, bring up some objections against it, and then reply back to them. So if you're interested in writing, if you're still looking for a paper topic and you're interested in the rights of non-humans, Aquinas provides a nice structure for that, because he has a position, he considers a position that it's wrong to harm animals, and then goes and responds to them. Now, why is he concerned with this? Why would a thinker as august as Aquinas be concerned about killing living things? Well, the main reason is religious. Why? Well, what does the Ten Commandments say about killing?
Thou shalt not kill.
Yeah, no killing. And it doesn't seem to have a qualifier on it. It says thou shalt not kill. And so it would be jokingly a hell of a thing to go to hell over a hamburger. So then this was taken seriously. I mean, because it lays out killing is wrong. And so Aquinas seriously considered that objection, that there could be a religious argument turn into a moral argument against harming or eating animals. So he takes it seriously. The first objection he considers is this: it seems unlawful to kill living things, and resisting divine law, as I mentioned, purchases a damnation, which is not something you want to buy. You don't want if you're like shopping, you see damnation in your shopping cart, do not buy that. Delete that from your cart. Even if it's a really good price, or if it's 2 for 1, you don't want that. And divine providence, divine law says all living things should be preserved. So it seems unlawful to take the life of any living thing. So he considers that as a serious moral argument and religious argument against killing things. The second objection is this: murder is a sin. Why? When you kill a person, what do you take away?
The life.
Yeah, their life. Everything they were, everything they are, everything they're going to be is gone. Plants and animals are alive. So, if murder is wrong because it deprives a person of life, then killing animals and plants deprives them of life. So he does consider that not only do animals count, but plants themselves count as well. So it would be a sin to kill animals and plants. The good question, of course, might be how would we survive? But I guess we could live on like apples and stuff, and milk and squeezins. Objection 3: in divine law, there's only special punishment for sin. And if you look at divine law in the Old Testament, if someone kills someone else's ox or sheep, then there's a punishment for that that goes against biblical rules. Therefore, killing these animals is a sin. And those are 3 reasonable arguments, namely that it's unlawful to kill. God has said, "Thou shalt not kill." Murder is sinful because it takes away life. Animals are alive, so taking away their lives would be sinful. And the Bible lays out punishments for killing animals, and those would be therefore sins. Now Aquinas, though, not surprisingly, since you generally, even though some versions of Christianity do frown on eating pork and eating meat. For example, many Seventh-day Adventists are opposed to eating meat. My person in my family actually lived to be 100. He would bike every day, didn't eat meat, lived to 100. So long lifespan. He was old, and he was still going when he was up when he was 100, still roaming around town, working and stuff. I'm hoping I'll make it that long. I think probably I do, so I'm not going to make it. Bacon's going to kill me. It's too late now because it's all it's already in there. It's already chopped off that it's already gone. They didn't warn us. They said, "Here, let's have some bacon." They didn't tell us, "Hey, this is going to kill you." They just gave us bacon. It was delicious. Now he makes use, in responding to the first objection, he turns to St. Augustine, not the city in Florida, but his predecessor. And Augustine, in his De Cive, City of God, considers a similar objection: "Thou shalt not kill." Now, how does he get out of this? Well, this is how he maneuvers it. He says, trees don't count because they have no sense. And irrational animals don't count, ones that are not rational, because they don't have fellowship to us. And Augustine's claim is, he's raising an objection in the form of a relevant difference. Because what Aquinas is doing is, and what Augustine did as well, is saying, well, thou shalt not kill, all these things are alive, so we can't kill them. And what Augustine, and Aquinas, following Augustine, says, well, there's an important difference. Thou shalt not kill is not, don't kill anything. It only applies to humans or people. So he gives the following, Augustine, and Aquinas follows him in this, gives a following response to it. First, he basically takes from Aristotle. Aristotle had the notion, as we saw, that all things have a purpose or function, teleology. And Augustine claims there's no sin in using things for their purpose. So the idea is basically, well, if something's made to do a certain thing, created by God, then using it for what it's intended for by God wouldn't be a sin, because that's what it's for. So to show that we can eat animals, what do you do that doesn't appeal to this? Augustine, Aquinas, and also, basically taking it from Aristotle, who took it from Plato, have this view that there is an order, hierarchy of things, from God, the most perfect, down to nothing, total nothingness. And his claim is that because we'll make a long story short, his view is basically this: lesser things exist for the greater things. So it's okay, crudely put, for us to eat animals and plants because they're inferior to us. Now, one interesting implication of this is that angels could eat us because we're under them. Fortunately, they don't eat us. They eat angel food cake. But given the argument, weirdly, angels could eat us, and God, of course, could eat angels. But fortunately, they're supposed to be, non-corporeal, so they're not going around munching on us, which I guess is good. Now, interestingly, or boringly enough, he does note that in the generation of, his view about generation of humans, he says first there's a living thing, then an animal, and then man. So he takes the view, because today people are very concerned about abortion, but in the time, if you go way back, there wasn't as much view that infants or babies before they were born were actually people. Part of it might have been because infant mortality was so high that maybe it made it easier to think of them as not being full people. But in any case, getting back to the main point by...
Is there something about how people, you don't have a baby and you have a fetus?
Yeah.
You're not, let's say, qualified put you have a baby until you're born.
Yeah. And on Augustine's view, his view is, well, this first a living thing that becomes an animal, then it becomes, once born, it becomes a man. So given Augustine's own argument about how we can treat animals, this could be, reforged into a moral argument for abortion, because if he's right about, not that, should be, Augustine wouldn't say, go around and just abort everybody, but it could provide a moral argument for it. And not surprisingly, people who are opposed to abortion, they wouldn't accept this. They wouldn't say that it's a life, then an animal, then a person. They say it's person typically from conception. But in Augustine, it would first be a living thing, then an animal, then finally a person. Now, so why is it then okay for us to eat animals? Well, again, his view is that it's the hierarchy. God, angels, us, animals, plants. And we're allowed, you're basically, to use a crappy analogy, it's like the food chain. When you're up the top of the food chain, you can eat what's down below. And so humans can eat animals because they're inferior to us. Animals can eat plants because they're inferior to them. Plants, I guess, get, some eat animals. So I guess they kind of throw things out. Now, this reply, that it's okay for us to do that because we're better than them, is often used to justify all kinds of awful stuff. I mean, when people want to do bad stuff to people, they typically say it's okay for us to do that to them because they're inferior or they're not people. So one of the risks of accepting that principle, I can do things to inferior creatures that, and it's not wrong, that opens the door to that justification. If I regard an animal as less than me so I can eat it, then people can take that principle, well, if something's less than me, I can do terrible things to it, and apply that to people. Now, the way to counter that might be to say, well, we can't do terrible things to anything, or someone could use relevant difference. Animals are inferior, I can eat them, but in the case of people, when people say other people are inferior, so we do horrible things to them, they're just wrong. People are equal. The final part of Augustine's reply is this. Now, what is the use of animals? Their purpose and plants, etc. Well, in order to survive, what do we need to do? We gotta eat. And what do we eat?
Plants and animals.
Yeah, plants and animals. I mean, when Augustine was doing his stuff, this is, way before, obviously, synthetic foods, ability to, create stuff. So things had to die. You had to eat, eat an animal, gotta kill it. Eating plants, unless you're just eating fruits, gotta kill them. And since we need to eat to survive, he believes it's lawful for us to do this. Now, so one of his arguments is, a moral one. Basically, we're better than them, so it's okay. And his final argument here is a religious one. What he does is he uses an argument from authority, citing scripture. Namely, Genesis says, "Behold, I have given you every herb and all trees to be your meat, and to all beasts of the earth." Or also in Genesis, "Everything that moveth and liveth shall be meat to you." So his final argument there, argument from authority. God says it's okay. So he's able to counter that first objection. And what about the second objection? About, the part about murder being a sin because it deprives animals of life. Well, his response to this is something that's echoed later in Descartes. He says, animals and plants lack reason. They're moved by natural impulses. So it's okay to eat them. Now again, it's essentially a variation of we're better than them, so we can eat them. To the third objection, the one about, killing an ox. Well, his claim there is that it's not a sin against, the killing is itself not a sin, it's depriving the person of property. To use like a modern analogy, if someone, busts up your car, they're not wronging the car, they're wronging you. And so Aquinas' view is, it's not a sin to kill an animal, it's a sin to kill someone's animal because you're destroying their property. So Aquinas concludes, eating animals is okay. Now, he doesn't advocate doing just like awful, horrible things to them for the hell of it. but his view is that using them for the purpose for which he believes they're intended, food, is okay. So Aquinas presents the classic religious, argument as to, although killing animals is killing them, why that's morally and religiously okay. So that brings us to the end of the stuff for today. And our next meeting again on Monday, we'll move on to Rene Descartes. So have a good weekend, and I'll see you Monday, but not Wednesday.